Jennings G. Ferguson.
Mr. Ferguson, have you lived in Gallipolis, Gallia County your whole life?
No, sir. I lived in Gallia County since 1954. I was born in Ferguson, West Virginia. We moved here, I was born in 1943, and Dad had a farm there, and when the older brothers left off for service, then he thought it was too much, and somehow we ended up with a farm in Gallia County, and I've been here since '54.
It's 1954. Now, you were also drafted for the Vietnam War, is that true?
Yes, sir.
So would you please tell us about your experience of being drafted and going to Vietnam?
Yes, sir. Well, I was drafted in February the 2nd. That's when I was drafted into the service. Prior to that, I think in January of '65, they called you down to take a physical to Ashland, Kentucky, and I was notified at that time they'd probably be calling on me at a later date, which was actually 2 weeks later. And when I returned to Gallipolis to the draft board, Mrs. Elsie Saunders was who head of the draft board at that time, and she told me that so you really don't have to go into service. You can get a hardship deferment, And I said, well, I'm not going to do that because my older brother, he got one of them, and then he went in and he said he hated it, so that was my decision. I said, if they draft me, fine. If they don't, whatever. So they ended up drafting. I could have volunteered, and I said, well, I'll just go for 2 years, and if I want to stay in, I will stay in. So I just took a 2-year deal. Of course, I think you have a little more privilege if you volunteering for a 3-year. You have more choice probably, but so I ended up being drafted.
After being drafted, you were sent to basic training. Where was that?
That was Fort Knox, Kentucky.
Fort Knox. And after Fort Knox, did you go into any special training afterwards?
After Fort Knox, I had advanced training, AIT, they called it, Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. And I went to a clerical school there. So I was actually a clerk typist when I finished up my training there. And whenever I finished up my training, I got orders for Vietnam. And that's.
So you were sent to Vietnam, but some of your classmates were sent to Germany, right?
Yes, sir. About half the class went to Germany. And I always thought that was part of the RAs, the volunteer part. I think most of the draftees went to Vietnam. So that's the way it appeared at the time,
I've heard that before. That if you wanted to get going to Vietnam, you volunteered and they sent you to Germany. If you were drafted, they sent you to Vietnam.
That was the word then. In my case, it appeared to be that way,
And so you ended up going to Vietnam in 1965 then?
Yes, sir.
So right after the Tonkin Bay Resolution, before the Tet Offensive, you're there when the build-up really is just now beginning to take place.
Just beginning to build up. When I arrived to Ton Son Nhut, Vietnam, they had where you come in country and process in and out. They called it Tent City. That's what literally that's what it was. Just big army tents you stayed in. And I remained there. I didn't have a regular outfit. This winter was a class, and later on they came around and whatever unit that needed a clerk, then they would come and get you. And I think I was there about 9 days, and they got a soldier out of another class and myself, and we went to end up going down to Saigon. They were starting up 12th Aviation Combat Aviation Group. Headquarters are in Saigon. It was just like 3 majors and a sergeant at that time, and so we was the 2nd and 3rd enlisted personnel down there. And Paul, he worked for the sergeant, and they took me upstairs to see the major, and I ended up working for 3 majors. And it was Major Johnson, Major Spaulding, and Major Whitlock. I can still remember their names, And Major Johnson was he was a senior officer, and he was in charge over all of them. And their function was they was all Army helicopter pilots, and on fixed wings were the Caribou airplanes and so forth. And they investigated any aircraft that was shot down, helicopters or whatever happened to them. That was their job. And I more or less ended up as I was a clerk, but they ended up more or less a gopher, do whatever they wanted, a chauffeur, delivery, whatever they needed done, that's what I done.
Did you get a chance to see any action while you were there, or were you
Yeah.
lucky enough just to be a clerk?
Well, as I say, you started. MOS was a clerk, but I've done a lot of other things. They say in the Army, you're a soldier, infantryman first, and then other secondary. So I just filled in what they needed. We was mortared and things of that nature. You know, we didn't stay in Saigon. I was just temporary, started out, and later they moved to close to the Tonsanuk Air Base, and then after that in '66 we moved. It's starting up a new base, Long Bend. They called it, became Long Bend, and I think we was either the second or third outfit up there, and they just sprayed it and dozed out an area, and we just set up camps up there, set up in Army tents, and that was close to Benoit. It was probably, I don't know the exact distance, maybe 5 or 6 miles from Benoit. And there was a new outfit started up there, new base, and eventually come to one of the largest, after I was gone, largest base in Vietnam. And eventually that's where the personnel came into the country and out of the country. It was at Long Bend later on. But,
you were laying the foundation for
yeah,
that.
basically we was, when I finished up my basic AIT, I'd hardly ever heard of Vietnam. And I recall one of the guys when we finished up AIT, one of the guys, the sergeant came around and give orders for where you're going to be going, and this one sergeant got his orders like I did, Vietnam, and he said, "Well, where in the world? I don't know where Vietnam is. Where is that?" And that sergeant, he said, "Soldier, you're going to find out real soon." So I can still remember that story about him.
But what we have, let's say, is you get there, and it's basically relatively early in the buildup, and
Yes, sir.
when you're getting ready to leave, do you see a change in the buildup? You see more and more soldiers coming over?
Oh, yes, sir. I commented on it before. At the time I got over in '65, I got over in July of '65, and it didn't matter what service in, Air Force or Navy or Marines. The Army was primarily the one biggest one at the time I was there. But you didn't see as many people there, and as a matter of fact, they was telling us that when you had to move from one place to the other, just flag down an Air Force guy or anybody to get from one place to the other, and I'd done that several times, and but that was at the beginning of '65. But at the time I left in November '66, there was people running everywhere. I mean, it was a big buildup in that year's. Well, I was over like 16 months, but that time period there was quite a bit of buildup.
Anything memorable in those 16 months that sticks with you?
Well, I had some incidents. Well, when I first got there, we didn't have actually any place to stay. And like I said, Paul Blythe and I were advanced party, and the rest of the 12th Aviation group came over like the end of August or first part of September of '65, and they in between that period they had a lieutenant was going to be the company commander of it. See, and he didn't have any place for these people to go, so he comes one morning. He gets Paul and I, and I'm like I said, I'm working for this majors, and I'm supposed to be there at 7 o'clock sharp, no matter what, And but yeah, he comes by and picks us up, and I said, "Where are we going, sir?" And he said, he wouldn't say, so I'll show you. And he takes us out of Saigon, out some road, clear out into, there's no man's land. There was nothing out there, nothing. And he has supplies out there for 3 tents to be built, for these people coming. He's going to put them out there, And I found out later it was a highly insecure area, So he takes us out there one morning early and dumps us off and tells us to put these tents up. I never put a tent up in my life, especially one of these big Army tents. And it was hot. We didn't have no weapon. We didn't take our weapons with us. We had no form of transportation and no communications. So we're out there working. And we get one tent up. Comes noon, he don't show up. Comes evening, nobody comes back. And there we are. And pitch dark, We didn't have anything, nothing to eat, nothing to drink. So there was an outfit way off. You could about a mile over, and we walked over to it, and that was the only thing out there. And they was, just out there in the jungle, really. And so we went over there, and they said, well, don't go back over there, stay here. But we went back, and we stayed all night there. And the longer I stayed, the more aggravated I got about it, because he never come back to check on us or nothing. And so about, we're laying there on a piece of plywood in the tents, just laying there. The only thing we had for a weapon was a hammer. And I had a watch on at the time. It was illuminated. You could see the time at night. And it's like one, I don't remember exact time, it was after midnight, like 1 o'clock or something. And they could hear commotion outside. And Paul was laying there, he was asleep. And I heard this commotion, and I put my hand over his mouth so he wouldn't, make any noise. And they was carrying on out there, and he was saying what we're going to do. And I said, no, we just whispering. I said, well, the only thing I got is a hammer. I said, if they come in this tent, you could tell it's Vietnamese. We don't know if it was a friendly or the VC, really. And it's kind of a strange feeling, I said, if they come, open that flap and come in this tent, I said, it's dark. I said, we'll just bust through them and head for the brush and just run right through them. That's the only chance we got. But it was a strange thing to come and somebody come and open the tent, and you just barely see an outline of them. They didn't come in. And after a few minutes, they was gone. When it comes daylight, we have nothing out there except the tent we're in, And so we was kind of aggravated, and I told Paul, I said, well, let's go. I said, let's just walk back to Saigon, which was a long ways. And he said, well, I better stay here. He said, guard this. I said, don't worry about it. They done took that, they can have the rest of it, And I said, I'm heading back to Saigon. So I started walking. After I walked probably half an hour, close to between half an hour and an hour maybe. I got a ride. I finally got back where there's some traffic, and they took me back to where I wanted. And my major Johnson, he was highly upset. He said, where in the world you been? So I was going to the morning, and the next morning I wasn't there. And he thought I was on a big drunk or something. He said, have you been drunk or something? I said, no, sir. And he said, you better have a good explanation where you've been. And I told him, and he called that lieutenant up there and asked if this is true. And he said, yes, sir, and all that. And he told me to get out there and get that soldier. And he said, you put them out there in an insecure area. He said, we're not in the United States. He said, we're in a war zone. You're subject to, get shot any time here. He said, And he chewed him out pretty good. But that was the end of that story, basically. But
well, it's quite interesting to say the least. Now, afterwards, after spending 16 months or so in Vietnam, you come back home, and you're not really meeting anyone who's protesting the war at this point in time.
No, I got discharged out of the Army in Oakland, California, and I flew into San Francisco and stayed overnight. And next day I went and processed out, and got a flight out there back to Chicago and then back to home. And I never met any protesters at the time I got out of service.
People were probably still patriotic about the war.
It seemed to be at that time, yeah. Yes, sir.
And you came back, you ended up getting a job in about 3 or 4 months after you were released from the service.
I applied for some jobs, and I returned home in November of '66, and later on I applied for jobs and finally got a call from the Goodyear plant, and that was in the spring, and they was going to Harvard, and they went on strike, so I didn't get they went on strike like 3 months or something, and from like April, May, I waited on the situation there to see when it was going to end. I had the job, but they was on strike, so I ended up in September of '67. Started working at Goodyear.
Now, 1967 is when the Silver Bridge collapsed. Do you have any memories you can share with us about the Silver Bridge collapse?
Yes, sir. Like I say, I went to work in the fall of September '67, and the bridge collapsed December the 15th. It was on a Friday evening, and I was, of course, I had to cross that bridge each day to go to work, and I finished up midnight shift. I worked swing shift, and I finished up midnight shift on a Friday morning. And normally, if they want somebody to work over, they ask them prior to leaving, and they just go by seniority. And if you want to work, you work, and you move to the next guy if you don't. But I get home, and then I done crossed the bridge that morning. I get home, and they call me to come back to work. And since it was Friday, my last midnight, I didn't go back, and they went to the next fella. And I always thought later on, if I went back to work, I'd have been pretty close. I'd been on day shift, and I'd been getting off after 4 o'clock in the evening. It'd been real close, because traffic was jammed on that bridge at the time. And my boss was on that bridge, and he went down on the bridge. And
What was his name?
Bob Head.
So now you had to drive up to Pomeroy to go to work, right?
Yeah, we tried driving. Well, we tried crossing in a boat down close to the dam, Police Locks. We tried to go across in a boat for a while. One of the guys in our carpool, Tom Pitcher, he had a small fishing boat, and we thought, well, that'd be good. We'd just ride there and cross over, and then we could walk to the plant. But after a few events of that, it's foggy, barges on the river. We about got swamped, and we decided it ain't worth it, so we changed our mind. We started driving around, go to Pomeroy, like you said, and you had to start to work about an hour earlier than you normally would, just to get up there and back down the river. And eventually put the ferry in at the mouth of Kenoi River at Henderson, and we'd ride the ferry back and forth across. Again, you'd have to leave early because it was foggy or something. The ferry didn't run. We'd been there. We'd be ready to get on the ferry. Fog would come in. We'd wait. Ferry didn't come back. So we'd be late. We'd have to go all the way up to Pomeroy and come back down, because if you get too foggy, they just shut down. You know.
Right.
I had that experience probably at times.
Was Goodyear somewhat understanding because of?
Yes, they was lenient on that process, because they knew it was difficult to get to work if you lived in the high, and they just wanted you to get to work. And if you was a little bit late, they didn't question it, you know.
But it was a experience that stuck with you for quite some time.
Yes, sir.
Anything else you'd like to share with us?
Well, about the part in Vietnam, was like I said, I don't regret going to Vietnam. It was quite an experience, and I'm glad I did go. I did get injured there in '65. I was in a freak accident, had both hips broke, and a knee injury, and they shipped me out. I was in the hospital in Tonsanook. They had a hospital there for. I was there, I think, 3 days, and they said they was going to ship me back to the States. They shipped me to the Philippines. I was there like 3 days and nights, and they decided, well, no, we're going to send you to Okinawa. Had a hospital there, so I ended up in a hospital at Kadena in Okinawa. And after we was there so many days, one of the officers came around in charge there and asked if there was 3 of us there at the same time from Vietnam, and asked if we'd be willing to go to an Army unit on the island, and just for room and board, basically, you know. And so I said, sure, we don't care, because they had a lot of people starting to come in from Vietnam, so they was needing space. So anyhow, they farmed us out to this Army unit, and I was like there from probably between end of December to March the 2nd, and I ended up returning back to Vietnam. But in between that time, at this unit, it really didn't have anything to do with board, you know. So when the rest of the unit would go out and fall out for reveille and do their jobs, and we'd wait till there's everything, and then we'd go down and have our dinner, and then we didn't have nothing to do, just fiddle around. It was boring, really. So talk to the cooks and stuff. And now I went by where the company clerk office one day, and he was a carrying on, and his name was Pennington. I can still remember his name. He's from Pendleton County, West Virginia. And I got to talking to him, and I asked him what's going on. He said, I'm swamped. So they got all this stuff for me to do, and ain't no way I can get it all done. He was carrying on. I said, well, I said, I ain't not doing anything. If you show me what to do, I'll help you. No, you ain't allowed to do it. You can't do that. And a day or two went by, and I went by her, and he hollered, he says, "That offer still standing?" I said, "Yeah." So I went in there, and he showed me some things to do, and I'd help him every morning. After breakfast, I'd stop and see if he needed any help, and I helped him there, quite a bit. And he showed me all the different procedures that he was doing, and I went ahead and helped him whenever he needed it. And one day, when it was getting close to getting released from the hospital, he asked me when I was going back to Vietnam. I said, probably this end of this week. I said, maybe one more checkup or two. And I said, it's going to be soon the way they talk. And he said, well, you don't have to go back. I said, well, what are you talking about, And he said, well, I talked to the company commander, and they need an extra clerk in here, and said, if you want to stay, he said, he'd take care of it, and you could stay right here. And so you think it over. And I thought a few days, and I don't know why I did, but I said, well, he asked me, and I said, well, I guess I'm going to go back to my outfit. I don't know why I went back, but shortly after I got back over there, about a month, well, when I got back, they moved from Saigon to Tonsanuk. I didn't know they moved. It took me about a half a day to track down my outfit. And when I found them, we just stayed temporary there till we, later on, with a few months later, about 3 months, we ended up going up to Long Bend, like I said. But when I did find them, we stayed there. Well, it was right close to there's a big air base. Tonsanuk had a big air base. And we was close to the runways there, and we had a helicopter unit company right there beside of us, and after there about a month, we were heavily mortared. They was like, well, they had different units around us, in a pretty congested area right there. And it like 7 killed and 160 some was wounded. And I had a job where it's called CQ, where he's over the guards the night before, And the next night this happened, and the guy that was on that, he was out trying to warn everybody and get them up, which everybody, when they started, you pretty well knew what was going on. But anyhow, he got injured. And I always think back, I could have happened the night before. It's just a matter of timing. You don't know. But I told my friend there, Paul, after a few days went by, I told him about that deal. I didn't have to come back, to Vietnam, and he looked at me, he said, and I told him, he said, "Are you crazy?"
Yeah.
He said, if I could have got to stay in Okinawa, there's no way I'd come back over here. He said, "Why would you do something that stupid?" And I said, "Just missed you, I guess."
Yeah, that's right.
I don't know why I come back really, but I didn't have to, but I did.
Well, you're young, and you don't really realize probably the danger.
No. So I basically was probably kind of young and inexperienced, and they did some, made some dumb mistakes, but who knows.
There was a reason they drafted 18-year-olds.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Mr. Ferguson, we thank you very much for your time and appreciate you participating in this.
Thank you.